The US president sacks Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State. Trump wants the CIA Director to take over, but with North Korea, Syria and Iran just a few of the issues at stake, is he the right man for the job? I'm Adnan Nawaz. Today's newsmaker is Mike Pompeo. For months, the Washington rumor mill was rife with speculation that President Trump was unhappy with his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. Those rumors have now been confirmed, with Trump nominating his CIA Director, Mike Pompeo, to replace Tillerson as the top American diplomat. Pompeo himself is set to be replaced at the CIA by Gina Haspel, and it was all announced via Trump's favorite medium, Twitter. He wrote, "Mike Pompeo, Director of the CIA, will become our new Secretary of State. He will do a fantastic job. Thank you to Rex Tillerson for his service. Gina Haspel will become the new Director of the CIA and the first woman so chosen. Congratulations to all." And within a couple of hours of that tweet, Trump stood in front of his presidential helicopter and made this statement.
I respect his intellect. I respect the process that we've all gone through together. We have a very good relationship for whatever reason, chemistry, whatever it is. Why do people get along? I've always, right from the beginning, from day one, I've gotten along well with Mike Pompeo. And frankly, I get along well with Rex, too. And, you know, I wish Rex a lot of good things. I think he's going to be very happy. I think Rex will be much happier now. But I really appreciate his service.
Well, the news was publicly announced as Tillerson arrived back in the US from a trip to Nigeria, and reports quoting unnamed White House officials say Tillerson was actually informed on Friday that he'd be losing his job. A colleague of Tillerson's at the State Department has said no reason has been given for the change. It comes at a time when the US faces enormous diplomatic challenges, including North Korea, Iran, Iraq, and of course the war in Syria. There were several reports of discord between Trump and Tillerson, including Tillerson reportedly calling Trump a moron. So what will the impact of this be on the State Department and for American diplomacy, as well as what happens inside the White House? With me here in the studio, retired US Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, who served as a Middle East specialist in the administration of George W. Bush and knows what it's like to be a Secretary of State because he served with Condoleezza Rice when she was Secretary of State. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Do you have to get along with your Secretary of State to have him in the job, because Trump has said that he disagreed on things with Tillerson?
Well, first of all, the Secretary of State has to be able to speak not only with the president, but on behalf of the president. And I think foreign leaders understood that when they were talking to Rex Tillerson, they weren't really sure if they were talking to Donald Trump.
That's interesting, but why would that be? Because of Tillerson or because of Trump?
Well, in many ways, the chemistry didn't seem to work out from the beginning. It was clear that President Trump was forming a very tough team with Jim Mattis, John Kelly at the White House, and other people that really reflected his politics, and Mike Pompeo was among them. Rex Tillerson, always seemed to be the outlier. He seemed slow in putting his team together. He seemed more focused on reforming the State Department from within rather than pushing the president's policies abroad, and there were notable disagreements between the two.
But that was probably, was it not, the reform within the State Department more coming from the administration than from Tillerson himself? There are a lot of nominations, diplomatic nominations, that the president hasn't made, and money is being withdrawn that it previously had, the State Department. Would Tillerson have been frustrated about that? Would that have been one of the issues, regardless of all the diplomacy going on, the machinations going on inside Washington?
Well, I really don't think so. I think part of the problem is that before the president can send a name up to Congress, they have to go through an extremely thorough vetting process. I happen to know many people that are being considered. The vetting process before they're sent up to the United States Congress seems to be much, much longer this time. But there were some notable examples when Rex Tillerson disagreed with the White House, as the White House wanted to put their people in the State Department, and Rex Tillerson wanted his own people.
Yes, one of the recent disagreements seemed to have been on a potential meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, with Rex Tillerson saying that he didn't think that would happen. And of course, now we know potentially that should happen by May. Our newsmaker today is, in fact, Mike Pompeo, but I'm asking you about Rex Tillerson because he's the outgoing man. So one more question about him. What will his short legacy be? What was his biggest achievement as Secretary of State? He has said to that colleague at the State Department that we just quoted, that he felt that he wanted to stay and that he was making a valuable contribution to national security. But how do you regard him overall in his achievements at the State Department?
Well, first of all, he came in highly recommended, and over the past couple of weeks in particular, he seemed to be finally getting his feet under himself. Very rocky at the beginning, but he seemed to now be taking on the task of speaking for America in the diplomatic tasks. So I think that his legacy will be a book incomplete, a book not finished.
And what's Mike Pompeo like?
Well, naturally, I have an affection for Mike Pompeo. I was teaching at West Point when he was a cadet. He was #1 in his class at West Point. I don't, because I didn't teach the smart people, and Mike Pompeo was certainly one of the smart people. He's got a great reputation inside of Washington, D.C. He has the ear of the president. And so I think world leaders, when they hear from Mike Pompeo, know that they're talking to Donald Trump.
And as a person, well, I mean, you tell me. I don't want to put any words in your...
I think we would all hope that anyone who graduated from West Point would be of the highest character and highest degree of honor. And I have no reason to think anything but that of Mike Pompeo.
What will it do to the State Department, his appointment?
Well, two things. I think the State Department should be uplifted because the State Department under Rex Tillerson had been so focused on the internal reviews and the management changes that they didn't think that they were getting anything done. His personality was such that he kept very close counsel of a small group of people, and the State Department likes to have everybody have a voice. I think Mike Pompeo is going to be completely different. I think he'll be much like Colin Powell. He will come in with a military background, understand that the real resources of the State Department are its people. I think he's going to be a much better learner, but he's going to be much tougher in terms of his policy views than Rex Tillerson.
Donald Trump has also said that he disagreed with Rex Tillerson about the Iran nuclear deal, which Donald Trump would like the European partners, signatories to that deal, have renegotiated. He says that if it doesn't happen, the renegotiation, he'll pull out of it, and that Mike Pompeo does see eye to eye with him on that particular deal. So that's a very concrete example of where American diplomacy could change with Mike Pompeo coming into the White House.
No, I agree, and I think he is equally as tough on North Korea, and frankly, he seems to be equally as tough about keeping Guantanamo open. So I think, in general, you're going to see a shift to the right in the policy of the Secretary of State. However, I think on the issue of Syria, he may not be as tough as people would expect him to be.
What might people expect at the moment because of the situation in Syria from the U.S. administration and the Secretary of State?
Well, I think the real issue is what's going on at the UN right now. Nikki Haley is talking about a bombing campaign potentially inside of Syria. And I think that Mike Pompeo is smart enough to realize that that simply won't work to achieve a diplomatic or political end state.
Rex Tillerson was head of ExxonMobil. Donald Trump was head of the Trump conglomerate. When you're in that kind of position, you tell someone to jump and they jump. When you're engaged in international diplomacy, it's not quite so simple. And Rex Tillerson, there are reports that he was not happy with Nikki Haley, that he felt that she was undermining him. Is Mike Pompeo a more inclusive man, having been in diplomatic circles for longer than Rex Tillerson?
Well, I actually think it's his military background. In the corporate world, you can push from the rear. In the military, you must lead from the front. So I think that Mike will realize, as I said earlier, the talent is not him. The talent is within the State Department. Now, he has to execute the policies and the views of the President of the United States, but I don't think he will pronounce them. I don't think he will dictate them. I think what he will try to do is use his natural charisma to bring everybody in the State Department together, get their views, and understand how the State Department, even though they may object in private to some of these issues, can work together as a State Department to execute the views of the President for the good of the United States of America.
And do you think he will specifically be able to get through to Donald Trump and actually affect some of the policies that Trump is considering? And let's be specific about North Korea. Before Donald Trump goes into that room to meet Kim Jong-un, will Mike Pompeo be able to affect the way Donald Trump reacts in that room?
Look, Mike Pompeo will have the seat at the table because he sits next to the President every morning as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency and briefs Donald Trump on the intelligence around the world. There's no doubt in my mind that Donald Trump picked him because not only is Mike Pompeo somebody who thinks the same as him, but I think in terms of those private meetings, he probably demonstrated to Donald Trump that he could stand up to him, that he wasn't going to just be somebody who was a yes man, but he was going to be somebody that the president knows that probably in private, that Mike Pompeo will disagree and try to influence the president, not only what's good for the office of the presidency, but also for the United States of America.
And for the spy agency, for the CIA, Gina Haspel is nominated to take over from Pompeo.
Yeah.
What do we know about Gina Haspel?
An enigma. There are some public announcements and public testimony talking to her time working for some of the enhanced interrogation programs.
That's very controversial, of course.
It is controversial, and it could come back to haunt her in her confirmation hearings up inside the United States Congress. But as you would expect, 30-year veteran of the clandestine service of the United States, you're not going to know a lot about her. But the fact that she was handpicked not only by Mike Pompeo, but also President Trump, indicates to me that they have full faith and confidence in her abilities.
Mark Kimmett, thank you very much for talking to us on The Newsmakers.
Thanks for having me.
Tensions are growing in the Eastern Mediterranean. The race for energy exploration is putting Turkey and Cyprus on a collision course. Tempers between these rivals flared last month when the Turkish Navy reportedly confronted this Italian drilling ship owned by ENI. The vessel named Saipem 12,000 was licensed by Greek Cypriots to explore natural gas in the disputed waters off the coast of Cyprus. The Eastern Mediterranean is parceled off into blocks like these. Turkish warships stopped the vessel as it was sailing from Block 6 to Block 3. The waters of the Mediterranean have always been a disputed issue between both countries. Greek Cypriots claim the area as part of their exclusive economic zone, while Turkey says this region belongs to its continental shelf. Ankara has also warned Cyprus to halt exploration until the Greek side reaches a profit-sharing deal with the Turkish side of the island. The dispute has also strained relations between Turkey and the EU.
On behalf of all the EU leaders, I would like to express our solidarity with Cyprus and Greece and urgently call on Turkey to terminate these activities.
Turkey, however, shows no signs of backing down.
Our warships, our air forces and other security units are closely following all the developments in the region with the instruction to make all kinds of intervention when necessary. We advise foreign companies who carry out activities off the coast of Cyprus not to overstep their abilities.
The international community has called on both parties to resolve the issue by solving the bigger problem, reaching a deal to unify Cyprus. The island has been divided since 1974, when Turkish forces launched a military operation and moved up the northern half of Cyprus. Ankara says the move was intended to protect the Turkish Cypriot minority, following a military coup on the island backed by Greece. Greek Cypriots call it an incursion on their sovereignty. Today, an estimated 40,000 Turkish troops are based in northern Cyprus. The most recent round of unification talks held in Switzerland ended in failure last year.
The conference on Cyprus was closed without an agreement being reached.
But analysts are hopeful the recent discovery of oil and the lure of riches could motivate both sides to come back to the table. And newly elected Greek and Turkish Cypriot governments could breathe new life into solving a conflict that has been deadlocked for nearly half a century.
Coming up on The Newsmakers, a new flashpoint between Baghdad and Erbil. The Iraqi parliament slashes the budget for the Kurdish Regional Government. Is it payback for seeking independence, and could it backfire? Plus, can Emmanuel Macron fix French prisons? We debate whether the president's new reforms will solve chronic overcrowding. It was a vote that was supposed to happen by the end of 2017. But after weeks of wrangling, the Iraqi parliament has finally passed an $88 billion budget. Kurdish lawmakers boycotted the session. The proposal has provoked a new dispute between the government in Baghdad and the Kurdish Regional Government, or KRG. It controls the autonomous region in the north. The KRG's share of national funds, well, that's been reduced by about 5%. Last year's independence referendum in the Kurdish region prompted a furious military response from Baghdad, which now also seems to be tightening its grip financially. Francis Collins reports.
It's a rift that's getting wider, and Baghdad is asserting its control, as it has since September, when the decision by Masoud Barzani, then president of Iraq's Kurdish Regional Government, to hold a referendum on independence, went ahead, despite the warnings.
Those who make such a declaration should bear the responsibility for it. It is easy to declare whatever you want, but it is not that easy to actualize it.
The vote was overwhelmingly for an independent state, but it caused division internally and across the region, while the Kurdish leader believed he had a mandate.
I would like to underline that we are never ever going back to Baghdad to renegotiate the failed partnership that we had in the past.
The referendum was less a declaration of independence, he said, but more of a starting position for a new relationship with Baghdad. It was one that happened swiftly, when Iraqi forces retook disputed territories, including the oil city of Kirkuk, dislodging the Kurdish Peshmerga. The city had been under Kurdish control since 2014. Other sanctions were also imposed, including suspending international flights from airports in cities in the region. It's now about the finances and how much money the government in Baghdad will send to the region. The new budget that was passed by the Iraqi parliament has cut the Kurdish Regional Government share from the 70% it's received since the fall of Saddam Hussein to one based on population. A draft has showed its new share will be just under 13%. The regional government disputes these figures. Its parliamentarians boycotted the vote. Barzani has called the funding a clear violation of the principle of partnership. The added complication is that oil exports from Kirkuk have been halted since Iraqi forces took back control of the oil fields. That too is being discussed.
It was agreed to start exporting oil from Kirkuk and to tackle differences later, because in the end, the Kurdish region needs money, and if oil is not being exported, no revenues will be generated.
The decision to slash the funding to the region has not gone down well. Its prime minister is scathing in his criticism.
The budget was passed without the approval of the Kurds or without giving them their fair share. The principle of consensus on which Iraq was founded has unfortunately been changed.
With falling oil revenues, there's now a financial reliance on Baghdad, but also a widening rift that says plenty about the future of the country. Is the north of Iraq being punished for its independence aspirations, or does Iraq actually have no real choice? Francis Collins, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined from Baghdad by Ahmed Rushdie. He's the foreign policy advisor to the Speaker of the Iraqi Parliament. In Erbil is Noruddin Waizi. He's an Iraqi Kurdish journalist. And from Washington, we're joined by Douglas Oliphant, Senior Vice President of Mantid International and a former advisor to US Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, having served as the Director of Iraq for the National Security Council. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on The Newsmakers. Ahmed Rushdie, first of all to you, is the Kurdish Regional Government being punished for holding that referendum back in September?
Well, actually, I think it's not a matter of punishment. It's a matter of understanding to each other between Baghdad and Erbil in a way to reach up. What we reached today is that the Prime Minister actually declared that the airports in Erbil and Suleimania can be on the international flight be there, and it is some sort of cooperation between the Iraqi government and the KRG in taking over those two airports. In a way or another, it means that all the problems between Baghdad and Erbil, it looks like it will be solved before the elections. Especially there are talks about the salaries for the employee inside KRG, that it will be launched by the Iraqi government, and there are some sort of settlements to the crossroads for the customers and so on. All these issues on the table of the Prime Minister himself and also the Parliament in a way or another, just to solve problems before the elections, and to say is that Iraq is united and also we can manage all our problems by ourselves.
Noruddin Waisi, what do you say to that? And also, why did you boycott the vote on the national budget?
Actually, this is good news today that Iraqi Prime Minister announced the lift ban on international flights. But I cannot say that, we cannot shorten all the problems, as your guest in Baghdad saying that all problems will be solved before the election, because the problems between Baghdad and Erbil is not just limited to flight bans or share of budget. There are a lot of political problems. We have, KRG has a lot of rights in the Iraqi constitutions, which is violated, this is a good step towards starting to solve all the problems, and Iraq, has to respect the constitution, which was voted by almost majority of Iraqis in 2005, and Iraq was built after 2003 on the partnership principle, on respecting the constitution, which is unfortunately until now a lot of articles from constitution is violated by Iraqi government, and there are a lot of main disputed issues between Erbil and Baghdad, which has to be solved. Otherwise, the circle of problems will continue.
Yes, it's quite clear from both of your initial answers that there are a number of issues between the KRG and the central government in Baghdad. You're referring to the elections that are going to happen later this year, which will elect a president and a parliament. You're talking about the lifting of restrictions on international flights coming in to the Kurdish region in the north. So just to give a bit of perspective about what you're saying, Douglas Ollivant, does the KRG have a case here when it comes to the national budget and that 5% reduction? The budget itself is $88 billion. At that conference in Kuwait last month, which Iraq wanted $88 billion to rebuild the country, if the national budget is the same as the amount needed to rebuild the country, $88 billion is not nearly enough to cover every different spend that the government needs to.
I think that's essentially Baghdad's point, that it could afford to give 17% to the KRG, although I don't think any observer any longer believes that the three northern provinces constitute 17% of the Iraqi population. But during luxurious times when oil was at $120 a barrel, that could be done and everyone was still happy. The issue is the Iraqi constitution is remarkably vague. And I think what we're seeing now is a reinterpretation of exactly how it's going to be applied. The old order that we had, where you could fly into the KRG without a visa, and the KRG was exporting oil on its own, and the KRG got 17% of the budget, that was a viable interpretation of the Constitution. But I think the new order as well, where the KRG is getting 12 or 13% of the budget, and you must have an Iraqi visa to fly into Erbil or Suleimania, and in which the oil exports are more strongly controlled, is also a reasonable interpretation of the Constitution, because the Constitution is simply so broadly written. that either of those are viable interpretations.
Noldine Vaisi, surely the fundamental question is whether the Kurds in the north of Iraq feel part of Iraq in terms of their identity. Are they Kurdish first and Iraqi second, or is it the other way around?
Actually, as we know, in the referendum, September 25th, it was, majority of Kurds, more than 91%, they voted for yes to independence. But meantime, as KRG officials always said that this is not a step or immediate step towards independence. But the problems come from Baghdad, which is treating Kurds as, second citizens. It's been 2 years or more than almost 3 years that Iraq cuts the budget of, employees in Kurdistan, and they refuse to supply Peshmerga forces with heavy weapons during the ISIS war. They, violated a lot of rights of Kurds in the constitution. There's a lot of problems in the disputed areas, and which is now controlled by Iraqi forces after October 16th, 2017. I think the Kurds in Kurdistan region, they feel that they are not, they have no rights in Iraq, and their rights are violated, and they feel they are treated as second citizens.
Ahmed Rushdie, what can the Iraqi government do to address those concerns?
Well, actually, first of all, does the referendum concern legal in Baghdad or not? Does the referendum concern legal in the regional countries, according to the regional countries, according to the international communities? We must put something on on the table on a real base. The constitution made the problem, and at the end, the referendum made the problem, and at the end, we need to know exactly what the referendum will end with, which is something very crucial to Baghdad and for the regional countries and also for the international community. This is first. Secondly, we all know that the KRG, they export oil without the permission of Baghdad. It's another issue, which means that the budget from this oil export by the KRG is not known to the Iraqi government. According to the constitution, there should be some sort of a committee that between the central government and the local government and the KRG to deal with the financial issue about the exportation of oil. Now, the third thing, which is also very important, is that we need to settle down some sort of a memo of understanding about the crossroads, about how to deal with the borders of Iraq as Iraq, which is also, according to the constitution, it is some sort of mixed relationship between the central and the local governments, which is now happening in the airports, which is going to happen according to what KRG accepted and also Baghdad accepted, is that there will be some sort of mixed management for the airports, for the international flights. All these things need to be managed well, need to have a roadmap, and at the end, just what Douglas said is that we have a constitution that it's broadly actually has a wide explanation, a wide explanation can be done with this constitution, but at the end, we should consider that the benefit of Iraq, as a united Iraq, is the most important thing.
Okay, let's pick up on the point of a united Iraq, Douglas Ollivant. More than 92, or just about 92% of people in that September referendum in the north there, the Kurds saying that they wanted to have their own state. Is independence eventually an inevitability? And if it were to happen, what would be the effects on Iraq itself, not just for the Kurds, but for the rest of the country?
I think that independence for the Kurds certainly independence is in the heart of all Kurds. We all know that. So the results of the referendum were no surprise. Every Kurd wants an independent state. But the devil is in the details. Do you want an independent state if it's going to be simply a wholly owned subsidiary of one or more of the neighbors? Do you want your own state if it's broke, if it can't support its people in anything approaching the standard to which they've become accustomed? I think the answer to those questions is no. So now we're looking to see what arrangements can be made, what arrangements will come about. I know there are many pockets of the Kurds who are alienated from Baghdad right now. I suspect that if the salaries start coming from Baghdad after the failure of Erbil to pay them on any regular basis for the last 2 years, that might go a long way towards smoothing over any hard feelings that are still in place because of the referendum and the aftermath.
Noruddin Waisi, when I just put that question to Ahmed Rushdie about how the Iraqi government is going to address your Kurdish concerns, it seems to me as if the thing that Ahmed was really pushing was this concession that the government has given about the airports. But that's only one thing. Give Ahmed another concrete proposal. Give him 2 proposals, if you like, about what you want specifically done by the Iraqi government.
Yes, Iraqi government, after 2003, it was built on the, mainly consensus and partnership principles. So Iraq cannot be governed or ruled by majority. As we know, Iraq is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious country. So it has to be a consensus between all components in Iraq. And of course, Kurds are the main component. And so until, the rights, the national rights of Kurds in Iraq are not respected, then, there will be disputed, issues between Kurdistan and Baghdad. So even, the next elections will not solve any issues, as some people, believe and think. We have to, because unfortunately in Baghdad, there are a lot of politicians, they even want to change the constitution or rewrite the current constitution, which is somewhat agreed by, Kurds in Iraq.
Noruddin, forgive me, you're again talking in generalities. Ahmed, do you have specifics that the Iraqi government is prepared to concede to the Kurds, or is it just too dangerous to talk about issues like that publicly and those kind of discussions only happen behind closed doors?
Well, frankly speaking, the Prime Minister and the Parliament actually pushed the 5 committees that between Baghdad and Erbil. It's a committee for the airports, for the salaries, for the oil, for the Peshmerga, and also for the crossroads, for the borders. So all those committees is actually now working day by day to solve the problems between Baghdad and Erbil, which means that technically speaking, we already have something on the ground. Ended for the first file for the airports. I think it's now solved. Now we are seeking for the second priority, which is the salaries for the employee in Kurdistan, which is, I think, the Iraqi government also will push hard to pay the salaries. And as working is going on with those technical committees, there will be some sort of political settlement between Baghdad and Erbil. I want you to say something about how to deal with the situation now. Especially, Iraq actually has a debt about $120 billion, and the oil prices actually is not helping. And all this, and we have also some sort of other financial crisis. That means KRG must also share the crisis with us, because, or let's say, share the solving of those crises. Because if we won't be together in one road to actually end all those crises for all of Iraq, it won't be helpful for KRG also, because at the end, the Iraqi government cannot, well, let's say in the future, will not pay the salaries again, because because it's already, the budget is already actually heavy with debts, and we have so many commitments with the international community. Well, in Kuwait conference, all what's happening is actually the 38 billion, it's already on investments and debts. There is no something called donations. The donations actually happen with small numbers. So all these things must share between Baghdad and Erbil to solve all those problems.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Newsmakers. Prisons in France are overcrowded. The problem is acute, and President Emmanuel Macron is planning to do something about it. He wants to build more cells and, for some crimes, for electronic tagging to be used instead of prison sentences. His critics say the government is focused on increasing the number of prisons rather than reducing the number of prisoners. Sandra Gatman reports.
France has a prison problem. Its jails are overcrowded. They have nearly 70,000 inmates. It's the 5th largest prison population in Europe. Thousands of inmates share cells with at least 3 other people. And over 60% of those released end up back in jail within 5 years. It's now become a safety issue. A string of recent knife attacks by inmates have sparked weeks of strikes by prison workers. They say around 4,000 assaults take place in French prisons every year.
Today we work in a total insecurity, our life at our risk. Compared to other assaults, they attack us to kill us.
The French government says it's time for an overhaul. The man behind the plans to fix France's prison system is President Emmanuel Macron. He's pledged to add 7,000 new cells, but that's still short of the 15,000 he promised on the campaign trail. But his biggest shakeup is a proposal to ban sentences of less than a month, and he wants sentences between 1 and 6 months to be served at home with electronic monitoring. France's conservatives, who've long campaigned for more prison space, say Macron needs to do more.
We spend less than 1% of our national GDP on our justice system. That's nothing compared to what we need to address rehabilitation, protection, and terrorism. We need a grand plan that deals with the whole picture.
The French president is also hitting back at critics who accuse him of being soft on crime.
Il ne s'agira clairement pas d'une concession à la fermeté nécessaire face à la délinquance, au contraire. J'invite d'ailleurs tous ceux qui pensent que c'est du laxisme à porter un bracelet électronique au quotidien. Et ils verront ce que c'est en termes de contrôle, d'emprise et de vraies conséquences.
Macron wants the extra prison space to help combat another problem, terrorism. Radicalized inmates and fighters returning from Iraq and Syria will be confined in separate prison wings to stop them from recruiting other prisoners.
1500 places vont être créées dans des quartiers étanches, exclusivement dévolus aux détenus radicalisés.
Macron has a lot to prove. As a self-styled reformer, he's facing pressure to act on growing evidence that incarceration systems are outdated and counterproductive. But France's ongoing threat of terror attacks and the rise of far-right parties may be reasons enough for Macron to play it safe, at least for now. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from Le Courtois in northern France is Patricia Chagnon, who is the regional councillor of the National Front Party. In Paris, we have journalist Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, a columnist for the UK's Telegraph newspaper group, The Weekly Standard and The Sun. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Patricia Chagnon, let's start with you. What do you make of the president's plans to reform? It's not only building new prisons, isn't it? He actually wants to, it seems, reform the penal system itself somewhat.
Well, our incarceration system has suffered for many years from severe neglect and lack of funding. And French prisons are horribly understaffed and terribly overcrowded. Macron wants sentences under 6 months to be applied outside prisons, and he wants judges to, he will ask judges to apply more alternative sentences and use electronic bracelets and other gadgets. It is quite scandalous to try to say to the French people today that we should be looking at using electronic bracelets. Let me just remind everybody that the Islamic terrorist who killed a Catholic priest near Rouen in July 2016 was actually one of those prisoners with an electronic bracelet who was not serving a sentence but outside a prison with an electronic bracelet, just free to go where he wanted. And he actually walked into the church and assassinated the priest while he was holding mass. So it did not protect society, and it will not protect society from terrorists who need to be locked up. The incarceration system is there to lock up dangerous criminals, of course, and to keep them away from society, but also to dissuade them from reoffending and sending a clear message to those who might consider breaking the law, and to tell them very clearly that breaking the law is not a good idea.
Yes, but so can I? We've got to come back to that point about that terrorist. Surely Emmanuel Macron is not talking about suspects or criminals like that. He's talking about people who have sentences of less than 1 month, which he says are ineffective because they have no follow-up and check-up procedure on those people who are sentenced to that shorter sentence. And he's talking about lesser crimes. He's talking about people taking drugs. He's talking about minor driving infractions. He wants fewer people in the jails, which you say is a good thing. He's not talking about potential terrorists, surely.
I'm definitely not saying that fewer people in jails are a good thing. I'm saying that we need to have, we agree on the fact that there is not enough room in French prisons today to cope with the number of prisoners, and that our prisons are overcrowded and overstaffed. We feel very strongly that every crime needs to be punished, and we would like to see a zero-tolerance policy being applied. Mr. Macron, in addition to what he said about prisons, has also stated that he wishes to re-establish certain civic rights for prisoners, like voting. Well, to resume this really is basically saying Mr. Macron is sending the wrong message to those people who are thinking of breaking the law. Minor offences will be forgiven. Offenders and criminals will take this into consideration and will see it as weaknesses. A sentence, especially a prison sentence, however short, is being deprived of your freedom and is a very, very strong deterrent. This will no longer be the case with Mr. Macron's reforms, and as a consequence, it will weaken the state. Macron, I think, also has contempt for the victims, shows contempt for the victims. Victims must be able to trust the state, that the state will punish the offenders of crimes and offences that have been committed in society.
Okay,
and they have a
Patricia.
right. They have right to see people being punished.
OK, we have another guest, so let's get another take on this. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, you wouldn't expect the National Front to agree with the Macron policy, I suppose, but everybody agrees that French prisons are overcrowded. What are the other defects? What's lacking in Macron's plans for prison reform?
Oh, there are many things that you could, many angles at which you could look at that, but basically what is lacking is money. Because there have been for a long time plans to build more prisons and more modern prisons. And when Nicolas Sarkozy came in, he had a junior minister in charge of building more prisons. And that, of course, vanished with the financial crisis of 2008, and it never came back. Monsieur Macron has said in his platform when he ran for president that he wanted 15,000 new prison places to be made ready, and he's now said this is unrealistic and we can only build 7,000. What he really means is they can't afford the kind of spending that would create new prisons and not just add to prisons that exist. And there's a large element of NIMBYism in that people do not really want to have a prison in their neighborhood. It's that you have to buy the land. It's all expensive and difficult. And the state in which French prisons are just now is horrendous. You've got people who are packed 6 or 8 in a tiny cell. They only are allowed to take a shower once a week. They see cockroaches on the floor. Some of them actually sleep on thin mattresses on the floor. And I'm all for prison sentences, but I don't think we've condemned people to live like animals. So that's a real problem. You then have the problem of radicalization in prison. He has promised that radical inmates would be isolated. This is something that the prison guards are more and more keen on, and it's perfectly understandable. They do not want to reform a revolt against them. The situation in itself is a tinderbox, and I think Monsieur Macron is well-meaning, and he sort of managed to sort of give hints to everyone that he was listening to them. But mostly, I think this is underfunded, so it will be a small reform. I don't think it's going to change many things. We know perfectly well that many of those sentences that have been given by judges are never enforced because there simply is no space.
Okay, so we've identified some of the problems. Let's look at some potential solutions, because Macron has said, and I don't want to, having already done it once, put words into Patricia's mouth, but Patricia did say that every crime should be punished, and Macron may have addressed that particular issue there. He says prison sentences are not there to respond to society's emotions. He says that a convicted individual is meant to return to society. And the rate of recidivism of people recommitting a crime after being released from prison and then going back into jail is 60% in France. And he wants to specifically tackle that. He wants to put more money into rehabilitation programs. Again, that's got to be a good thing. Anne-Elisabeth, first to you.
Again, the problem is that one of the ways to avoid recidivism, which I think we all want in terms of sort of healing the fabric of society, and one of the ways to do this is to have proper follow-up afterwards. And then again, we're talking about more people on the ground. We're talking about people who've got more time to oversee the people who recently liberated. This country is unable to offer proper vocational training to normal people who have committed no crimes. And there again, you've got a problem in that there ought to be something already organized within the prisons for people to either learn a job or at least get some skills in terms of job hunting. And then there has to be support afterwards. And again, I think, I do not condemn the people who work on this, because I've met people who work in prisons and they are dedicated and they work hard. I think there's a question of possibly reorganizing this so that it's not so much top-down with the ministry at the top. Top-down is a very old French system, and it dates back to the Sun King, and we like top-down hierarchical structures, but we need to have something that will enable initiatives overseen but not entirely organized from the top, and that would help the prisoners find openings in a society that still has structural employment of almost 10%.
Okay, Patricia, what solutions would you like to see implemented apart from more money being made available?
Well, definitely money is a key issue, and it's where the priorities have to be clearly established. I think for the overcrowding of the prisons, we all agree that the conditions are horrendous and unacceptable for the prison, not only for the prisoners, but also for the prison staff. So, yes, we need to build more prisons, and the 15,000 that Macron promised at the beginning when he was on campaign and has been reduced to 7,000 is totally unacceptable. But we also need to look at other solutions. We need to look at solutions of maybe reconverting empty public buildings into low-security facilities for people who have committed minor crimes and who are convicted of have very minor convictions. We also need to be looking at signing agreements with countries of origin of certain prisoners who are not French, and to see how we can bring them back and do their imprisonment in their home countries rather than in prisons in France. Apart from the overcrowding, I was addressing the problem of the conditions in the prison, and your other guest also spoke about it. Over the past couple of years, the jobs have become just hell for the people working in those prisons. The prisons are understaffed. The people are overstretched, and they are totally exhausted. But there is something else. They are suffering from verbal abuse, from physical abuse, and they are constrained by many procedures and lots of red tape in trying to get control over their prisoners within the prisons. And that also, the authority of the staff in the French prisons need to be restored. They need to be more of them, but they also need to have the adequate authority to be able to do their jobs correctly. It is totally unacceptable that they can be insulted and that nothing is done about it.
Okay,
So,
listen, we only have about 2 minutes left, so I want to just give you 1 minute each, okay, to end with, and don't go over it because we won't cover it. What about the Scandinavian systems? In all those countries, in Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, the recidivism rate is roughly around 40%. There are open prisons. They look like youth hostels. Some of the prisoners can go into towns and do their jobs. They can see their families at weekends. That system seems to work. Would it work in France, or is it very specific to Scandinavia? Anne-Elisabeth first, 45 seconds.
I would like for the Scandinavian system to work in France, and I'm not sure it would, because Scandinavia is a very cohesive society with a great deal of solidarity inbuilt and a very flat hierarchy of relationship in society. And that probably comes from being a place where the winters are harsh, and if you cannot count on your neighbors and people in society, you can very well die of just exposure. And I think there's a great deal in terms of the social contract that wouldn't work in France, but you could try it as an experiment, and it would be a very good thing, as you said, on sort of low-level criminals. It would be a start. It would be easier to build from a small start and then try and spread it.
Really appreciate the brevity. Patricia, can you be just as brief, please?
I shall try. Yes, well, we have tried. Under François Hollande, Mrs. Taubira, his Minister of Justice, tried the alternative punishments and alternative ways to deal with crimes, and it did just simply not work in French society. So I think the past has proven that we need to change the method, and what Macron is doing is basically an extension of what Mrs. Taubira had started. So we have recently seen the problems in the prisons, but they are an extension of the problems that have been in French society all over with our police forces, but also with our medical forces and our firefighters. It is time that the authority is reinstored and that people, both people who think that they can commit crimes, but also victims, get confidence in the state that they will actually take care of the business.
Patricia Chagnon, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, thank you very much indeed. That's all from this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Adnan Nawaz. But do check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, outrage over the poisoning of a former spy. The UK is demanding an explanation from Russia, but Moscow says it's got nothing to do with it. How can the dispute be resolved? We're asking the questions. Until then, thanks for watching. Goodbye.